Okay, so my name is Jerome Jackson. I'm a senior here at the University of Colorado, and I'm an ethnic studies and history double major. Today I wanted to come to you and just kind of present a new topic, a new proposal for a research grant. I want to start first though with a little activity, just to kind of get us all jumping and moving. So I'll just simulate it since. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a word up here, and I want you to all just kind of tell me what are some of the first things that come to mind when you see that. What are some of the different things that you think make up diversity in just a very broad perspective? Blah, 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 blah. And we'll just pretend that they okay, this and that and this and that and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we'll just kind of pretend that we have some things up on there. So a lot of times when people talk about diversity, especially like in a more inclusive setting, ability is oftentimes left off the map with there. And so we all have different abilities, different things that we can do, things that we can't do. And just because someone has a disability, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are permanently impaired from doing entire tasks. So oftentimes people make assumptions that, okay, this person has this disability, so therefore they're going to need help, they're going to need me to hold the door for them, they're going to need me to do this and that, when that may not be the case at all. So when we're talking about diversity, it's very important to have a very inclusive approach to look at all these different identities through a more holistic lens for approaching it. And that's kind of what I want to do with my proposal that I'm submitting to your organization, is looking at this particular community, people with disabilities, and how does that identity intersect with other identities. So things like race, or gender, or class, or sexual orientation, or religion. How do those different identities intersect with that particular identity to create different dynamics that people may have and different experiences that they may have. So what I kind of want to start off with first, within my proposal to you, is a literature overview, just a little synthesis of different things that I've come across in some of my research. Like I mentioned before, I'm an ethnic studies major, and so within that field, it's a very multidisciplinary field. It looks at different identities. Oftentimes ability is not one of them. So things typically race, class, and gender, and oftentimes as well sexual orientation are included, but ability, again, is typically left off the mark. When I research disability studies, which is a field that's been emerging over the last several decades, oftentimes those other categories of race, gender, so on and so forth are oftentimes left off from there as well. And so this is very problematic because there's so many people out there who have who are affected and the targets of multiple forms of discrimination. So just looking at a singular approach, if I just look at race for everything, then I'm going to miss out on all the other things that intersects with that, and the same thing goes for ability. So in addition to that, what I found in the research is, I'm kind of blanking out right now. So that's one of the things I want to do is provide a kind of space to talk about how those different things come together. In terms of my methodology, what I want to do, I want to do interviews with people who have disabilities and ask them different questions about how does that intersect with those different identities. So some ways in terms of getting that group, that population group, would be contacting, there's some classes on disability studies that are offered on campus here, so contacting the people within that department, within speech and talking to them. Also doing snowball recruiting where one person refers another person to this person, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different cultural student groups on campus that I know many people within them that I can talk to those individuals, and so on and so forth. What I would do with the grant is part of it would be for compensating the participants who decide to participate in the study. So let's say if it's about an hour-long interview or so, maybe giving them like $15 or $20 or some type of incentive to participate in that, I think would increase the success of this entire proposal. Additionally, since your organization, I looked into the guidelines, you provide funding for time and effort that the actual research investigator puts into it. I'll be requesting funds for that as well. And I'll itemize the different amount of time that it'll take for me to do the proposal to the different components that are associated with that. Some of the questions that I think would be intriguing to ask are what would be, how does your particular identity affect how others perceive you in different lights? How does it intersect with those other things? So someone, for example, who is homeless and has a disability, they're not, when people may make a degrading statement about them, or maybe they're treated in a negative way, for them it's not going to just be that, oh, it's for their disability or just for their socioeconomic status. It's going to be a double-edged sword with that. So kind of asking some open-ended questions about that, giving people the space to do that. Additionally, just kind of asking them about what type of power dynamics have they seen, if any at all. Some people have a higher level of consciousness and understanding of these different things, how things may affect them on institutional levels, cultural levels, individual levels, and so on and so forth, whereas to other people may not have that at all, or they may not see those as being any issues. So kind of getting that's a very good way, I think, of looking at diversity, is looking at a diverse set of opinions. You're not going to have everybody who feels exactly the same, that they're all being treated the same or different. And it's also very difficult because there's over 60 million people with disabilities in this country, and that term can be so broadly defined. The federal government uses much different terminology that's much more restrictive and is medically based, whereas to people on the social level may identify and define disability in a much different way. Additionally, there's asking other questions in terms of the participants, kind of asking them about how do they feel relations are with regards to people with disabilities today. Recently, Congress passed a law, a hate crimes law, that expanded the definition of hate crimes to people with disabilities as well as people who are transgendered or part of the LGBTQ population. But disability was something that very few people really talked about, and many politicians said that there's no need to have this particular law for the simple fact that we already have other laws in the book banning such forms of discrimination. So kind of asking participants, do you think that it's helpful to have more laws? Do you think we should be expanding them? Do you think that the existing laws are working now? Do you think that maybe they're inadequate, they could be modified, or maybe we should just not do anything at all? What are some of the things, like how can we move forward? What are some solutions? And also I think kind of juxtaposing that with the responsibility on temporarily able-bodied people to take a more sense of consciousness, develop a more sense of consciousness and their own responsibility in terms of how they treat people of various different abilities and how we structure our institutions and so on and so forth. After I complete that, I would like to write up a summary of the different findings I had within it, and also submit that to your organization as like a follow-up, and kind of outline some different solutions or outcomes that we could all have. And one big solution, I think, is just that within the fields of ethnic studies, within women and gender studies, within disability studies, is for all of those different fields to intersect with all these different identities that we have, like not just looking at maybe some of the more primary ones, but looking at some of the ones that may not be as visible. Because a lot of times someone's disability may not be visible, so you may overlook that. So kind of creating, how do we create that type of discourse within the academy where we can take that more holistic approach. So that's kind of just the basics of what I wanted to talk to you about today with everything, and I just really hope you will consider this proposal. So, thank you.
Good job.